No, this is not my normal content, and it's probably going to be the last time that I make content or speak about this specific topic because it's getting tired, and I'm not really wanting to argue with people. I watched the entire 2 hours and 58 minutes of the GOP-led hearing about the origins of COVID. I took notes, and without giving you my opinion, I'm going to just read you the notes that came from the hearing specifically about the COVID, the vaccines, and the pandemic impacts. And that's what I'll do. Again, I'm going to give you my unbiased notes with just the facts of what they talked about in this hearing. Okay? Okay, this was the Senate and Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, and this aired on July 29th, 2026 on PBS News. The hearing centered on reviewing the U.S. response to COVID-19 several years after the pandemic. The senators discussed the origin of SARS-CoV-2, federal public health recommendations, vaccine development and rollout, scientific transparency, long-term health, economic, educational, and societal impacts, government accountability, and trust in the public health institutions. All right? COVID-19's impact was that members of the community stated that COVID-19 resulted in millions of deaths worldwide, large numbers of hospitalizations, long-term illness, which they call long COVID, disruptions to families, workplace shortages, business closures, interrupted education, mental health challenges, economic instability, global supply chain disruptions. These impacts were discussed as historical consequences of the pandemic rather than disputed points. The origins of COVID-19. The hearing repeatedly addressed two competing hypotheses: the natural spillover from animals and accidental laboratory release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Committee members said that they believe that the laboratory origin theory warrants continued investigation. The hearing did not present new evidence establishing either origin as a fact. The discussion about vaccines focused on several topics. Vaccine development. They said Operation Warp Speed, the rapid development of an mRNA vaccines, emergency use authorization, federal vaccination campaigns, and they were discussed as major components of the United States pandemic response. The vaccine effectiveness that was discussed said that the members referenced that vaccines were promoted as intended to reduce severe illness, reduce hospitalization, reduce death from COVID-19. Some senators questioned whether public messaging accurately reflected changing scientific understandings as new variants emerged. The hearing did not include new clinical trial data. Discussions center on public messaging and policy. Hold on. Some senators stated that individuals have reported serious adverse events following vaccination. Families believe vaccine injuries were minimized or insufficiently acknowledged. More attention should be given to those reporting vaccine-related health problems. The statements reflect the concerns raised during the hearing, and the hearing itself did not establish that the reported injuries were caused by vaccination in individual cases. The committee members also discussed that COVID-19 itself caused respiratory disease, organ complications, death, long COVID, chronic fatigue, neurological symptoms in some patients, extended recovery periods. They also discussed the burdens on intensive care units, physicians, nurses, hospitals, families, and caring for ill relatives. What's wrong? As far as the topic of education goes, committee members discussed schools closures, remote learning, learning loss, social development challenges, effects on children with special education needs, effects on working parents, and several senators argued that these consequences should be considered when evaluating future pandemic responses. As far as the... Hold on, man. As far as the economy goes, the discussion included small business closures, job losses, inflation, supply chain disruptions, government relief spending, workforce changes, and these were presented as major society effects on the pandemic response. They also discussed public trust. A recurring topic was declining public confidence in public health agencies, scientific institutions, government communications, and the community members discussed whether inconsistent guidance during the pandemic contributed to reduced public trust. As far as transparency, the hearing repeatedly addressed calls for greater transparency regarding government decision-making, scientific advice, internal communications, research funding, public messaging, and Republican members stated that restoring public trust requires more complete disclosure of records and testimony. Fauci largely declined to answer substantive questions, invoking the Fifth Amendment. Lord, I'm sorry, I can't talk. Invoking the Fifth Amendment on advice of the council. Okay, now that we've gotten through the topics that they spoke about, what I did the most notes about is actually the origins of COVID-19 and the vaccines. All right. So on the topic of the origins, Senator Rand Paul stated that in his view there is substantial evidence supporting continued investigation into the possibility that the SARS-CoV-2 originated from a lab accident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He referenced the U.S. funding for coronavirus research involving Eco Health Alliance. Son, stop screaming. Eco Health Alliance, the NIH grants connected to the research in Wuhan, previously released NIH communications and emails, earlier congressional investigations, and then he argued that the American public has not received complete transparency regarding the virus's origin. The committee, several Republican senators on the committee stated that they believe that the lab leak hypothesis was dismissed too early during the early pandemic. Scientists and government officials should have been more open about uncertainty regarding the virus's origin. More disclosure of the government records is warranted, and that these statements reflected that the committee members' positions and investigative concerns were not being really addressed. Fauci pled the Fifth, essentially, the entire time. He invoked the Fifth Amendment and did not provide real answers, right? So that was for questions regarding the Wuhan Institute of Virology, NIH funding, Eco Health Alliance, previous statements to Congress, and the origins of SARS-CoV-2. He literally continued to answer those questions by saying he invoked his Fifth Amendment right under the Constitution, blah, 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 as advised by his counsel. As a result, no new factual testimony from Fauci on the topics was entered into the hearing record. One of the one of the things that I found entertaining was that one of the senators said, because he has been pardoned, which we all know he has been pardoned by Trump from 2015 or 2014 crimes all the way into 2025. So he's pardoned for like a decade worth of bullshit that he done did. But he said because he's been pardoned, he is not able to acknowledge any of his constitutional rights. He continued to do so regardless. As far as vaccine development goes, the hearing acknowledged that COVID-19 vaccines were developed rapidly under Operation Warp Speed using emergency use authorization pathways. The committee members discussed the unprecedented speed of vaccine development as one of the defining characteristics of the pandemic response. Committee members continue to note that federal agencies initially promoted vaccination as means to reduce severe disease, reduce hospitalization, reduce death, and help limit transmission. Several senators argued that public messaging evolved over time as new variants emerged, and that this evolution contributed to public confusion and declining trust. Disregard. My baby is at a door that I can see him through, knocking on it. He's inside of the house, just in another room. It's a window door. I can see him. Several senators stated that constituents had reported serious health problems following vaccination. Examples mentioned during the discussion include reports of myocarditis, pericarditis, blood clotting events, neurological symptoms, persistent fatigue, and other long-term health complaints. The senators argued that these individuals believed their experience had not been significantly acknowledged. The hearing itself did not determine whether or not any individual cases was caused by the vaccine or the vaccinations, because the hearing was not about proving whether or not they were. Multiple committee members stated that long-term vaccine outcomes should continue to be studied. Adverse event reporting systems should remain under review. Individuals reporting vaccine injuries deserve medical attention and investigation, and that transparency regarding vaccine safety data is important for maintaining public trust. Committee members discussed that COVID-19 itself resulted in respiratory illness, hospitalization, multi-organ complications, long COVID, neurological symptoms in some patients, and millions of deaths worldwide. Long COVID was referenced as an ongoing health issue affecting some individuals well after their initial infection. Several senators stated that the public health guidance changed over the course of the pandemic regarding issues such as vaccination and transmission. They argued that shifting recommendations affected confidence in the federal health agencies, and the discussion focused primarily on communication and transparency rather than presenting new scientific findings. Because Dr. Fauci invoked the Fifth Amendment throughout the most substantive questioning, the committee's evidence largely came from senator statements, previously released documents, and prior investigations, rather than new testimony from Fauci. That means that many of the committee's assertions were presented without direct rebuttal during the hearing. Overall, the hearing's discussion of COVID-19 origins centered on whether or not the laboratory origins hypothesis deserved greater investigation, and whether federal agencies have been significantly transparent about research funding and early scientific uncertainty. The vaccine discussion focused on three recurring things: that rapid development and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines under emergency authorization happened, that questions about public messaging, particularly how recommendations changed as scientific understanding evolved, and reports of adverse health events after vaccination, with committee members arguing that these reports warranted continued investigation and acknowledgement that they were not getting. The hearing did not present new clinical trial results, new epidemiological research. Instead, it reviewed existing information, raised questions about government transparency and oversight, and highlighted areas where the committee members believed additional accountability investigation were needed. Those are my notes on origins and vaccination. Now, as somebody who did watch all 2 hours and 58 minutes, I think it is important to know also that they proved by looking at and viewing emails and internal documentation that belonged to Fauci and his team, that this man ramped up on millions of dollars in prizes and titles and all type of shit for his personal satisfaction, and that he used his government employees, his employees that work with him that were federal employees at the time, to search for titles and accolades that can be applied to him as a scientist personally, and especially the ones that came with financial prizes, where he had them to hit his federal employees. He had them to research these titles and awards and things, to apply for these titles, awards, and things, and to literally reach out to the ethics committee of the people who awarded these things to pressure them to choose Fauci so that he could get the money. These things are factual, as proven by his own emails, their internal work emails, and the documents that they were able to find. So those are some of the things that are also talked about and shown with documentation. They show you the emails, they show you the names of the people who worked there, they show you the names of the people who did shit. Like, it's in the hearing. Now, while they did not go into clinical trials to prove what did or did not happen with the health, they absolutely proved that this man made $1 million off of doing this to y'all, and that his goal became to be one of the best scientists in history or some bullshit like that. They said he wanted to be able to get all of the accolades that came with being a doctor or a scientist, said to be one of the greatest ever to do it type shit. But they also, like I said, found the ones and the accolades that came with cash money prizes so that he could put that cash money in his personal bank account. Okay. Now that's all I have to say about that, because those are all my notes. You can go watch the rest of it. You can go watch the whole video yourself again on PBS News YouTube channel.